Hey everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. I wanted to kind of revisit the elevator topic. One of the very first videos I did on this channel was how to script a basic elevator, 30-minute long video. Kind of went into a lot of the fine details of how to do it, and it seems like a lot of people like that. So I wanted to kind of come back to that. That elevator build. Um, I've learned a lot since then. There's some things I would do differently, so I wanted to share that. Also, there was some people running into a hiccup of a difference between the leaked build and the current build, beta build. So, wanted to just kind of give you a new option to view. Hopefully, will be a little bit shorter, but I wanted to kind of go into some of those fine details as well. So here we have this giant wall with a platform up on top. You can see our little switch. We're going to kind of talk about scripting an elevator to go up there. So the very first thing is I want to look at some of the pieces, and I'm going to have you ignore a couple of these pieces for now because it'll be for later. But first thing I have is a platform. This is a object I found in the Halo design set under floors. It's one of the larger objects. Uh, floor quadruple size is what it's called. Okay. Um, And so that's where you're going to want to start. What is it you want to move? And then we're going to next ask the question, where do we want it to go? Um, so the first thing for removing any object in the game is you need to set it to dynamic if you want to use scripting with it. Just kind of think about it. The most of the objects in the game are static. The game doesn't have to use a lot of memory. It knows where they're going to be. Um, but dynamic, because you're planning to manipulate it or move it or things like that, it needs to kind of handle it a little bit differently. And that's why they let us switch back and forth so that they can actually allow us to have more objects in the game. So we've set it to dynamic. I'm going to leave it phased for physics wise. And um, first question is, where would we want it to go? So I have some pointers here. We'll come back to those, but realistically, we want to have the elevator take us up if we're starting at the bottom. So I have this pointer that I've set. It's called top position, and kind of why how I set it where it is I looked at the coordinates on this one. Notice we have 91, 92 for x, negative 40 for y, and 505 for z. Z is our up and down coordinate, and the x and y are essentially, you know, forward, backward, left, and right. Um, so I set this to be the exact same coordinates except for z because we want it to be higher up. And so the way I got the 572.83 is I basically just took my object and placed it where I wanted it to be, and I saw what the z coordinate was so I could know um, where it would land at the very top. The other way you can do that is just like duplicate the object, have it at the same coordinates, bring it up, that sort of thing. But I mean, you'll figure it out. But you want to be pretty precise so your elevator actually goes straight up and down instead of like slightly to the side and things like that. So we've got our top position, we've got our platform, and this is going to be our bottom switch, which is going to be what we activate to go up. So um, I've already created a node graph, and for the sake of time, we'll kind of come back into it here in a minute, but I want to show you some of the basics. First off, if you don't already have a node graph, going into the menu, up into the gameplay section, and then go down to scripting, you can actually just create a script brain. If you don't already have one and you hold your Y button and go up to the node graph menu, it'll actually open the node graph menu, create a script brain for you. Um, in this case, I've got the script brain. You can actually have really as many script brains as you want. Just keep in mind, script brains do take up memory, and the nodes inside them take up memory. The kind of guidance right now on how many nodes you should do in one graph is less than 120. Some people find that even up towards the 90, 100 range, you're starting to run into glitches and weird things. So kind of general rule of thumb that I use is don't go overboard. If things seem to not be working quite right, sometimes it's better to split it into a couple brains. Um, the other thing is, right now, at least in the game, there's some issues when it comes to duplicating nodes and even copying nodes and script brains. I'm not sure exactly what's happening, but it starts to cause glitches and things. So you'll see me placing every node that I'm working with and editing the features or the settings on them individually, and that's why, because I want to avoid any sort of glitches that might happen, because there's some weird ones, trust me. So basically what you're going to do, and I'll show you how we're going to do this, you're going to just take the objects that you need here in your node graph. So I've also placed a button up here. We can grab that as well. It's called our top switch. Um, Platform. This is our bottom position. It's essentially the same as the top. Put it at the exact coordinates of this platform and our bottom switch. So I've got 5 things. Now if I go into my node graph, I can hit the Y button on my controller and click Add Object References. You can also get there from right-clicking on mouse and keyboard. And so you just pull in all of the object references. Okay. So again, I've already grabbed some of these up here. So I want to focus on this part of what we're actually doing first. And then if we need to grab anything else, we will. So here in the node graph, first off, I guess I'll just show you around a little bit. So you have your node browser. You can get there by hitting X on the keyboard, or I'm sorry, on the controller. Right click on your mouse and keyboard, hit add node, it pops it up. And in the browser, you have lots of options. These are really, they did their best to categorize nodes on what section they should be in. I think that they did a decent job. It takes some time working through this to find all the nodes that you need. So feel free, to explore around. Sometimes you got to look through each menu till you find what you want, till you kind of have it a little more memorized. You can also ask online or even throw questions in the comments of the video. I'm always taking a peek at the comments. I want to try and help everyone out as much as I can. Um, but in order to get started, I'm going to kind of just show you through some of these sections. Oh, before I do that, I will say if you bumper over, you can actually get to a node property. So if you have a node selected, you can see some properties, change some settings on it. You can also actually access objects within the game. So this is another way that I believe you can select something and then add it in. But anyway, let's get started on the elevator. That's why you're all here. So first thing is we've got our bottom switch. So that was added by adding the object reference, and then our on object interacted. So we're going to come into the node browser here and we're going to go to custom events custom. That's going to have a lot of the things that you're going to create yourself as an event versus something that's already built into the game. But on object interacted is right there on the list. That's what we use to basically, anytime there's a switch that you would hold X to activate, you can use this to create the event so that we can say when that happens, let's do something. So you can see I've got this long line coming down here to our next step. I'll show you why in a minute. Um, Normally I'd probably put them a little closer, but since we're going to change this up here in a minute, I wanted to leave this all in the same place. So when we activate the switch, what do we want to do? Well, what we want is we want that platform to go up. Okay, we want it to go up to the top position. And so the first thing is we need to kind of have something to store our position. Where is it, top or bottom? The nice thing is we only have 2 positions, which means we can use a true and false. It doesn't matter which one's assigned to top or bottom, but we can just flip back and forth between the true and false. And This branch, which is a logic node, you can get it on the logic menu. Uh, it uses what's called a Boolean, which is a true or false, basically on or off, 1 or 0. Um, and so we can use that to say, if something is the case, then let's go the true route or let's go the false route. So really handy. You can chain them together, different things. But what I did first off is I created a variable so that we can kind of store our true and false. So up here, I've used what's called declare Boolean variable. When you declare a variable, you're basically just creating its existence in the graph. Um, so declaring is done through the variables advanced section. And then you have this whole list of declare different types of variables, get different types of variables, and set different types of variables. So we created a declare Boolean variable. And once that's declared, you can pop over here into the node properties. And you have a few options. So you have identifier. So the identifier is a unique, like basically word or phrase or string of words that you're going to use to say this Boolean variable is something. And what I do personally, because it helps me out and it also helps anyone that looks at my node graphs out, is I try and use the shortest thing possible that says what is actually happening with that variable. So in this case, we're using the true and false as a direction. So I've set it to the word direction, all lowercase because it is case sensitive. Then you have your initial value, so you can toggle this back and forth. I'm going to start it with false. Not that it really matters, but false will essentially be um, when it's false, it's considered at the bottom. When it's true, it's considered at the top. Well, false means it needs to go to the top. True means it needs to go to the bottom. Anyway, and then you have your scope. So scope is basically um, what can access this variable is kind of the best way to do it. So global scope means other script brains that I create could access this variable. Local means that we could only access this variable from this script brain. And then object variable or object scope means that every dynamic object in the game has that variable linked to it, and you would have to access through that object to see what that variable is. I won't go into more details on that here. I did make another video talking about scopes, which I would recommend checking out if you don't understand that very well. Okay, so let's get back over here. So we created a branch, and then we used a get Boolean variable. So that's found in the same menu, variables advanced. You scroll down to get, and when we're getting a variable, you're basically saying let's get whatever's being stored in our declaration. So we got it, and we're feeding it into the condition of our branch. So the condition, or I'm sorry, now the branch is going to say, if that condition is true, let's go the upper route, and if it's false, let's go to the bottom route. Well, we told it to start out as false, so we're going to see it going down the bottom route. So let's follow that. Okay, so the next thing is we have this node translate object to point is basically we're saying we want to move an object to a certain point. Well, that's perfect for our elevator because we're trying to move that platform up to the top. So we grabbed our object reference for our platform, which I named platform, and plugged it into this translate object point. Let me show you where this one's at. So objects transform is normally how you manipulate objects, move them around, change their orientation, those sorts of things. And so you have a couple options for movement. Translate, which is more of just move it directly to that point. And then you also have move object to transform. It'll actually rotate the object to face the same direction that the other object you're moving it to faces. So a couple options there. This one felt like it worked better for what we need. And then here are the settings. So you're plugging in an object, you're plugging in a position, you're plugging in a duration, which is how many seconds it's going to take for that object to go from point A to point B. And then you have your movement curve. So there's a few different options in your movement curve. I used ease in, ease out, or ease in and out cortex. So it means it's going to start out a little bit slower. It'll speed up through the middle, and then it'll slow down at the top, kind of like an elevator does. You know, it doesn't just jolt to full speed immediately, and it doesn't stop immediately while at full speed. It has kind of some ease in, ease out going on. And I put 9 seconds just to keep it a little bit slower. The game right now is a little bit glitchy. If you go too fast, you'll just fall through objects and things like that. So 9 seems like a decent speed. So we plugged in our platform, which you'll see we also plugged it into this one up here, but we'll get back to that. We have get object position. So we've created a pointer and put it up at the top where we want the elevator to stop. Um, think about it, it's kind of like an imaginary track. So here's one end with this pointer, and there's the other end. Okay, so it's going to come up, stop here, and then when we tell it to go down, it's going to go down and stop there. And since this object's considered its position off of this corner, when we set our settings to be exactly off that corner, just higher or lower, it's going to just move perfectly to where we want it. Um, okay, and then so we use this get object position. So this is an object, it's not a position. We actually can't plug it directly into the position spot. So we had to use get object position, which you plug in the object, it gets its X, Y, and Z coordinates, which is also called a vector 3, and it then feeds it to this position. So anything that's a vector 3 or coordinates should be able to connect up to the position. So then when this is done, we're moving on to set Boolean variable. So what we're doing is, remember our direction started out as false. Now that it's at the bottom, we don't want it to try and go to the bottom again. We want it to go to try and go to the top next time. So we're going to tell it as soon as this is done moving, switch it so it'll go to the top. So when we run it again, it'll come into this branch, and it's because we're storing true up here now. Sorry. It's going to come into this branch, and it's going to go the true route, which we basically have the exact same thing. However, we're using the bottom position as our location we want it to go to. And then at the end, instead of switching it to true, we're switching it to false. So it's flip-flopping back and forth every time we move it. So that's kind of the gist of what we have going on. Um, not all that complex. It just takes kind of knowing what to plug together. And so let's give it a test. Keep in mind, this is only connected to the bottom switch. We're going to talk in a minute about the top switch, but right now nothing is connected to it. So when we click that, see how it starts out slow, starts going up, it's a little glitchy, and there's our elevator. Top switch does nothing because we haven't connected it. So let's do that. Let's connect the top switch. Well, my original video had the hard way of doing that, and since I know a little bit better now, let's talk about the easy way. So the best way okay, so first off, we're going to use what's called a custom event. It's an event we're creating. Logically, it is basically like a function of its own. So we're saying when we trigger this function, we want it to do a specific thing every time it's triggered. And the nice thing is we can feed a few differences in, which I'll show you in a second. But the best way to know if you need a function for something, or a custom event, is ask yourself, am I trying to do the same thing twice? Like if you find yourself, or twice or more, but if you find yourself about to copy a whole section of nodes and say, I need to do this exactly the same again, you probably want to stop and just create a custom event because it helps keep you from duplicating things, and it helps keep things a lot cleaner and more efficient. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to unhook that, and we're going to go into our node graph, or sorry, our node browser, and let's go up to our events custom, and let's grab one of these. So I like to use the global version. That way, in case I ever need to access it in a different node graph, it's already set up for me. You don't have to though. So you have the on custom event and trigger custom event that are local, meaning they'll only work in this specific node graph. And then you have the two that are global. In this case, we want the on custom event global because we're saying when we trigger that event, we want it to do this. And we're actually just going to keep everything the same and just plug it right in, okay? So the only other thing we need to do is name this, which the identifier needs to be a unique name so it knows what to trigger when it runs this event. And in this case, since we're having it move the elevator, we're just going to call it move. We're going to keep it simple, all lowercase. And if I come back and look at this later, I'll say, okay, this is the movement of the elevator. And then up here, when we press our bottom switch, we want it to trigger that. So let's go to trigger custom global event. Same thing. Let's name it move. It has to be exactly the same cases, like lowercase. And we'll plug it in. So this is what I was showing you too. We don't need anything extra for what we're doing here. But there are some options to basically include when you trigger that event, include an object, include a number, or include a list of objects, or all three of those, which you can then access when it actually triggers down here. So super convenient. Like let's say for some reason I needed to know which player was riding the elevator. I don't, but I could plug this in right there, and then I would be able to access the player that's it's technically the player that triggered the button, but you get the point. So we don't need that. Now, again, we kind of dissected our stuff, and now it's coming here and teleporting over to here, but it should run exactly the same. So let's test it just to be sure. Yep, it's working exactly as we wanted. Okay, so now I want to show you the easiest way to trigger it from the top. Now that we have a custom event, we can basically just get our object reference for the top switch, say when we interact it, run that same event. So I have it already sitting right here. Let's grab an on object interacted, which is in our custom events. Connect them and trigger custom global event. And in this case, we're doing the exact same thing, so we're going to call it move as well. Nothing different from the other one. And all we have to do is connect them. So pretty cool, because now when we click the switch, it's going to run our custom event global. And if we click this switch, it's going to run the same thing. And since we already inside our function over here, inside our custom event, we told it to kind of just manage its own logic. Go up if it's false, go down if it's true. We don't need to do anything else special. We don't need to feed it anything. It's just going to run properly for each switch. So let's do a test. Let's go up. And let's go down. Perfect. It eases out, and I was like, why did it stop? Okay, so that's really it. If you just want an elevator that goes up and down, has two switches, that's it. That's all you got to do. Um, let me show you something else that I put together. So this is using an area monitor. So I created this pointer. It's just called pointer2. But what you'll notice is I actually added a boundary to it. So when you go into the object properties, when you have it highlighted, you can come down here to the boundary and you can set a boundary. So I set it to box 120 by 120 top of it's 8, so it's high enough for a player to walk in and out of. So this is imaginary, but um, like you can't see the boundary normally. But what I did is I pulled that into our graph as well. So this stuff you were probably noticing at the bottom that you were wondering what it was. Let's bring that up. So how this works is we used an area monitor. Area monitors are found in the uh, normal variables, basic variables section, so up at the top. And basically what that does is an area monitor, you plug in something that has a boundary and it just keeps track of what's inside that boundary, whether it's grenades or players or objects that are sitting in it. It keeps track of that. And then you can use this event, which is in our normal events section up at the top. You can go to on object entered area. So it's, remember, our boundary is pretty big. Let's say we walk into the area, it's going to trigger it. Let's say some other object goes into the area, it's going to trigger it. We actually only want it to trigger when we're in the area. So I did a quick branch here. So we plugged in the logic and we used this get is player node from the players section down here. And basically it just returns true if the object is a player. That's what we want. So we're basically saying once something enters the area, if it's a player, if that's true, keep going. If it's not, we didn't connect anything to false, so don't do anything. And then the other thing I did here is I want this area, since it's on the ground, I don't want it to trigger and do anything if the elevator is already at the ground, because the idea here is I want to walk into this area and have the elevator come down if it's at the top. And so what I did is um, I put this branch here, and then we're just going to check the direction automatically. Okay, so keep in mind it's starting out at false at the bottom. When we run it as false, it turns to true when it gets to the top. So we're going to say if it's true, which is why we're going off this top section, then let's go ahead and run our custom global event. So when I'm walking through it, when the elevator's already at the bottom, it's doing absolutely nothing. See, I'm inside it right now. It's not doing anything. But let's go up to the top. And actually, I'm not going to go up there. I'm going to jump out here. Okay. Kind of run out here past our area monitor. But you notice, like, let's say we wanted this elevator to start moving as soon as I get close to it. It's not moving. I wonder if we, let me just make sure. It might not be set up right. So we have move. If false, move it to the top position, set it to true. Disconnect something. That looks right. Here, let's do this. Let's have it up here, and then let's change this just for the sake of time. I don't want to deal with it. So let's just say it always starts at the top as true. There we go. See, I came close to it and started coming down without me having to go and hit the button. I don't know if I love that ease in, ease out, but you get the point. It's you can use area monitors to trigger elevators as well. The other thing you can do, I'm not going to get into it now, but is basically there's a way to essentially put a button on your elevator so that if it's, you can just run on and press the button while you're already on the elevator and then ride it up. And but you also have your callback buttons if it's the opposite direction. So Anyway, cool stuff with elevators. Let me know if you like this, and feel free to comment if you have something else kind of simple like this that you'd like me to build and do a demo on. I'm always glad to help out too. So if you have something you're struggling with, reach out in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching. Hope you guys have a wonderful day and good luck out there.